Elena Martinez stood alone in her kitchen at 9:17 p.m., the overhead light casting harsh shadows across 6 carefully set dinner plates that hadn't been touched. Her navy dress, the one David always said brought out her eyes, felt heavy against her shoulders. The pearl earrings he'd given her for their 25th anniversary caught the light as she moved, but tonight they felt more like a costume than jewelry. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the first plate, the good china she'd saved for special occasions. The roasted chicken sat cold under foil, the mashed potatoes forming a skin, the green beans wilted and forgotten. She'd spent 3 hours cooking, another hour arranging everything perfectly, believing that maybe, just maybe, if the meal was special enough, they'd remember why family dinners used to matter. The kitchen smelled like home, garlic, rosemary, and the faint trace of her vanilla candles. But underneath it all was something else, the bitter scent of disappointment that had been building for months. She'd lit those candles at 6:30, expecting to blow them out, surrounded by laughter, and her grandchildren's sticky fingers reaching for seconds. Elena lifted the second plate, Marcus's favorite pattern with the blue trim. How many times had she served him on this exact dish? Scraped knees and hurt feelings, teenage heartbreak and college stress, new job celebrations, and his divorce papers. This kitchen had seen it all. She'd been his soft place to land for 32 years. When had she stopped being essential and become invisible? The third plate belonged to Sophia, and Elena could picture her daughter's bright smile, the way she used to steal bites while Elena cooked. "Just testing it, Mama," she'd say with a wink. But Sophia hadn't called her Mama in years now. It was always Mom in that rushed, distracted tone that suggested she had somewhere more important to be. As Elena scraped the untouched food into containers, her reflection caught in the darkened window above the sink. She looked older than her 58 years tonight, her carefully curled hair now flat, her lipstick long faded from checking the time every 10 minutes since 7 o'clock. She'd reapplied it twice, wanting to look her best when they arrived. The silence in the house felt different now, not peaceful like the quiet evenings she and David used to share, but hollow. Even the refrigerator's hum seemed louder, more insistent, filling the space where conversation should have been. She could hear her neighbor's television through the thin walls, canned laughter from some sitcom about a perfect family who actually showed up for each other. Elena's phone sat face down on the counter where she'd placed it after the third unanswered call. She knew if she turned it over, she'd see nothing. No missed calls, no apologetic texts, no explanation for why they'd promised to pick her up right after dinner, and then vanished into their own lives. "They promised they'd pick me up after dinner," she whispered to the empty room, her voice catching slightly. "I waited for 3 hours in my best dress, but no one came." She turned off the kitchen light and stood in the darkness for a moment, letting the weight of the evening settle around her. What she was about to discover would change everything between her children and her forever. But tonight, in this moment, she was just a grandmother who'd believed in promises that were never meant to be kept. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Just 2 months earlier, Elena's house had been the heartbeat of the Martinez family. Every Sunday at 2 o'clock sharp, the front door would burst open with the sound of little feet racing across hardwood floors and voices calling, "Abuela, we're here!" It was a ritual as dependable as sunrise, one that had filled the hollow spaces left by David's absence. Marcus would arrive first, always punctual like his father, with 8-year-old Lucy bouncing beside him in whatever princess dress she'd insisted on wearing. "Grandma Elena!" Lucy would shriek, launching herself into Elena's arms with the kind of pure joy that made Elena's heart feel full again. Marcus would kiss her cheek, already smelling like the cologne she'd bought him last Christmas, and head straight to the kitchen to steal pieces of whatever she was preparing. "Ma, you know you don't have to cook for an army every week," he'd say, but his eyes would light up when he spotted her homemade tamales steaming in the pot. Those were his weakness. The same recipe his grandmother had taught Elena 40 years ago, the one she'd passed down like a sacred trust. 20 minutes later, Sophia would breeze through the door in her designer jeans and perfectly styled hair, little James clinging to her leg with his gap-toothed grin. At 6 years old, he was quieter than Lucy, but twice as affectionate, always gravitating toward Elena's reading corner, where she kept a basket of books just for him. "Sorry we're late, Mom," Sophia would call out, though she never seemed particularly sorry as she settled into the kitchen with her coffee, already scrolling through work emails on her phone. But then James would tug on Elena's dress and whisper, "Abuela, will you read to me?" And Sophia would look up with genuine warmth. "You're spoiling him, you know." "That's what grandmothers are for," Elena would reply, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Those Sunday afternoons stretched like golden honey. Elena would watch Lucy help set the table, standing on a step stool to reach the good napkins, while James arranged the silverware in wobbly lines that were never quite straight. Marcus and Sophia would actually put their phones away, mostly, and the dining room would fill with the kind of easy conversation Elena had dreamed of during the long, silent weekdays. "Tell us about when Dad was little," Lucy would demand between bites of Elena's famous tres leches cake. And Elena would launch into stories about Marcus trying to cook breakfast at age 7 and nearly burning down the kitchen, or Sophia's phase of insisting she was a mermaid and refusing to get out of the bathtub. The afternoons would stretch into early evening, with Marcus helping with dishes, while Sophia supervised the children's playtime in the backyard. Elena would pack leftover containers for everyone. Marcus never cooked during the week, and Sophia claimed she was too busy for anything more complex than takeout. "Mom, you're a lifesaver," Sophia would say, balancing containers and corralling James toward the car. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Elena lived for those words. She'd built her entire identity around being needed, being the one person they could count on. When Marcus called Tuesday nights asking if she could babysit Lucy Thursday evening, she'd rearrange her pottery class without a second thought. When Sophia needed someone to pick up James from school during a work emergency, Elena would drop everything and drive across town. "I lived for those moments when they needed me," Elena would later reflect. "I thought that meant I mattered. I thought being useful was the same as being loved." It was Lucy's 8th birthday party on a crisp Saturday afternoon in October, and Elena had arrived 2 hours early to help decorate. Pink streamers hung from the ceiling of Marcus's spacious living room, and Elena was arranging princess-themed plates when she heard Marcus's voice drifting from the kitchen, sharp with irritation. "I'm telling you, Rebecca, Mom's getting clingy again," he was saying into his phone, probably talking to his ex-wife. Elena froze, her hands still clutching a stack of napkins. She called twice yesterday about some tamale recipe, like it was life or death. Then she showed up here Wednesday, with groceries I didn't ask for. Elena's stomach dropped. She'd called about the recipe because Lucy had mentioned wanting to learn how to make them for a school project. The groceries were because she'd noticed Marcus's refrigerator was nearly empty the previous Sunday, and she knew how busy his law practice kept him. "Hold on," Marcus continued, and Elena heard footsteps. She quickly busied herself with the napkins, her heart pounding as Sophia walked into the kitchen, carrying a bag of ice. "Is that Rebecca?" Sophia asked, setting the bag on the counter. "Tell her I said hi." She grabbed her own phone and started scrolling. "Speaking of Mom being extra, did you see she reorganized my pantry last week when she was babysitting James? I couldn't find anything for 3 days." Marcus chuckled, still on the phone. "At least she didn't show up unannounced like last week when I had clients over. Rebecca, you should have seen their faces when she walked in with a casserole, asking if I was eating enough vegetables." Elena remembered that day differently. Marcus had mentioned in passing that he had an important meeting, and she'd thought homemade food might help him make a good impression. She'd used her key, the one he'd insisted she keep for emergencies, because she'd wanted to surprise him. I know, Marcus was saying. "She means well, but ever since Dad died, it's like she thinks we're still 10 years old. Rebecca, I've got to go. The party's about to start, and if I don't supervise, Mom will probably rearrange my entire kitchen." Sophia looked up from her phone and laughed. "Remember when she cleaned out your medicine cabinet and threw away all your expired vitamins? You were so mad." "Don't remind me," Marcus said, finally ending his call. Sometimes I think she needs to get a life instead of managing ours. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced herself to keep folding napkins. They were just venting, she told herself. Everyone needed to blow off steam. She'd done the same thing about her own mother years ago. It was perfectly normal. But when the party began, and Elena tried to share a story about David's 8th birthday party, how he'd insisted on wearing his cowboy costume to dinner, Marcus barely looked up from his phone. "That's nice, Mom," he said absently, thumbs moving across the screen. "Hey, Lucy, come here. Uncle Tony wants to FaceTime you." Elena's words hung in the air, unfinished and unheard. Sophia was taking photos of the cake, and the other parents were chatting among themselves. The story about David, one of her favorite memories, dissolved into the party noise like it had never mattered at all. Later, as she helped clean up, Elena told herself they were just busy. Successful people were always busy. But a small, uncomfortable truth had lodged itself in her chest. The people she loved most were beginning to see her as a burden rather than a blessing. The changes came gradually, like a slow leak that Elena didn't notice until she was standing in a puddle of her own diminished importance. What had once been daily phone calls dwindled to every other day, then twice a week, then only when they needed something. "Mom, can't talk now, I'm in a client meeting," became Marcus's standard greeting when she called his office. She'd started timing her calls for lunch hours or after work, trying to catch him at better moments, but there never seemed to be a good time anymore. When she'd mentioned feeling lonely in their big house, he'd respond with practical solutions delivered in his lawyer voice. "Maybe you should join a book club or something. There's a senior center on Maple Street." Senior center. The words stung more than he'd intended. At 58, she didn't feel ready to be shuffled off to activities designed for people her age, as if grief and loneliness had an expiration date that coincided with retirement. Sophia's responses were different but equally dismissive. "Mom, you really need to make friends your own age," she'd said when Elena mentioned how quiet the house felt. "It's not healthy to depend on us for all your social needs." The irony wasn't lost on Elena. She'd spent 30 years making herself available for their social and emotional needs, but apparently the arrangement wasn't meant to be reciprocal. The Sunday dinners, once sacred and untouchable, began shifting like sand beneath her feet. "We might be a little late this week, Mom. Sophia has James's soccer tournament." Then, "Can we do every other Sunday? Lucy has so many activities now." Eventually, "Let's try for once a month. Everyone's schedules are just crazy right now." Elena adapted each time, rearranging her grocery shopping, her meal planning, her entire week around their availability. She never complained, never pushed back. Good mothers were flexible, understanding. Good mothers didn't make demands. The babysitting requests stopped coming altogether. When Elena finally asked Sophia about it directly, the answer came with a bright, dismissive smile. "Oh, Mom, James is in after-school care now. It's great for his social development, and honestly, it's easier than coordinating schedules." The subtext was clear. Elena's care was no longer convenient enough to be worth the effort. Even her gifts, the care packages she'd send to their offices, the surprise groceries, the homemade meals, were met with polite, but increasingly distant gratitude. "Mom, you really don't need to do all this," Marcus said when she brought soup during his bout with the flu. But he said it while checking his email, not while looking at her. And she realized he meant it literally. He didn't need her to do these things. More painfully, he didn't want her to. The final erosion came during what she thought would be a normal conversation. Elena had called Sophia to share that she'd seen Dr. Martinez, no relation, despite the name, about the chest pains that had been worrying her. Instead of concern, Sophia's response was a distracted "mm-hmm," followed by, "Mom, can I call you back? I'm trying to finish a presentation for tomorrow." Elena hung up and sat in David's chair, staring at the photo of their family from last Christmas. Everyone was smiling, arms around each other, looking like the perfect family she'd worked so hard to create. But she was beginning to feel like a stage prop in their lives, useful for creating the right background, but not essential to the actual story being told. She was disappearing from their lives one dismissal at a time, and the most heartbreaking part was that they didn't even seem to notice she was fading away. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late November when Elena's world tilted on its axis. She was standing in aisle 7 of Fernandez Market, debating between two brands of olive oil, when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Elena, how wonderful to see you." She turned to find Janet Rodriguez, her former teaching colleague, approaching with a warm smile and a shopping cart full of Thanksgiving supplies. Janet had been her closest friend during their 23 years at Roosevelt Elementary, and seeing her familiar face made Elena's heart lift for the first time in weeks. "Janet!" Elena embraced her friend, inhaling the familiar scent of her lavender perfume. "How are the grandkids? Is Maya still doing theater?" They fell into easy conversation, the kind Elena had been craving. Janet asked about Marcus and Sophia, and Elena found herself lighting up as she shared their recent accomplishments. Marcus just won a big case for the firm, and Sophia got promoted to senior marketing director. And the grandchildren, oh, Janet, Lucy's reading at a 5th grade level already, and James just scored his first soccer goal. Elena's voice carried the pride that had sustained her through the lonely weeks. These were her children, her legacy, her proof that all those years of sacrifice had meant something. "They sound wonderful," Janet said, her eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. "You must be so proud, and how lovely that you all stay so close. I saw Marcus and Sophia at Bella Vista last Sunday with the kids. Such a beautiful family dinner. The children looked so grown up." The words hit Elena like cold water. Bella Vista was the upscale Italian restaurant downtown, the one with white tablecloths and wine pairings, where reservations were booked weeks in advance. Elena's smile remained frozen on her face, but something inside her began to crumble. "Oh," she managed, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. "You must have been busy that day." Janet's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her features. "Actually, I was there with my daughter for her birthday. The kids looked so happy. Lucy was showing James how to twirl spaghetti properly, and Sophia was laughing at something Marcus said. It was one of those perfect family moments, you know." Elena nodded mechanically, but the ground beneath her feet felt unsteady. Last Sunday. She remembered it clearly now. She'd spent the afternoon reorganizing her photo albums, waiting for a call that never came. She'd made herself a sandwich for dinner and watched an old movie, assuming they were all busy with their individual plans. "I'm sure you have such lovely family dinners at your house, too," Janet continued, oblivious to the devastation she was unknowingly causing. "You were always the best cook among us teachers. Remember those potlucks where everyone would fight over your tamales?" "Yes," Elena whispered, her throat suddenly tight. "Family dinners." They chatted for a few more minutes, but Elena heard none of it. Her mind was stuck on the image Janet had painted. Her family around a restaurant table, Lucy teaching James table manners, Marcus and Sophia sharing private jokes, a complete family unit that didn't include her. They hadn't forgotten to call her. They had actively chosen not to. The walk to her car felt endless, each step heavier than the last. Elena loaded her groceries with trembling hands, her reflection in the car window showing a woman who suddenly looked every one of her 58 years. She sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, staring at nothing, as the reality washed over her in waves. She had become optional. Worse than optional. She had become someone they actively excluded while maintaining the pretense of family closeness. The call came on a Thursday evening while Elena was watering her kitchen herbs, trying to find peace in the simple ritual of caring for something that actually needed her. Sophia's voice was bright and excited, the way it used to sound when she was a teenager with good news to share. "Mom, I got the promotion, Senior Director of Marketing. Can you believe it? They're giving me the Davidson account and everything." Sophia's words tumbled out in a rush of joy, and for a moment, Elena felt her heart swell with genuine pride. "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you, Elena said, setting down her watering can and settling into the kitchen chair where she'd taken countless calls from her children over the years. Thanks, Mom. Listen, we want to celebrate properly. Marcus is organizing a family dinner for Saturday night. You know how he loves to play host when there's good news to share. The whole family will be there, and we want you dressed up nice for the occasion. We'll pick you up at 7 sharp. Elena's face broke into the first genuine smile she'd worn in weeks. A family celebration. They wanted her there, wanted her dressed up nice, wanted to include her in Sophia's triumph. I'd love to come. Should I bring anything? Maybe those stuffed mushrooms you used to love, or… No, Mom. This is our treat. Just be ready at 7, okay? We'll handle everything else. Saturday arrived with Elena's excitement building throughout the day. She spent 2 hours preparing, choosing her navy dress, the one that reminded her of happier times with David, and carefully applying makeup she rarely wore anymore. She prepared a tray of appetizers anyway, unable to show up empty-handed after 30 years of never arriving anywhere without contributing something homemade. By 6:30, she was sitting by the front window, watching for headlights. The appetizers sat covered on the kitchen counter. Her purse was positioned by the door, and she'd checked her reflection 3 times to make sure everything was perfect. Sophia was getting promoted, and her family wanted to celebrate with her. Finally, she felt needed again. 7 o'clock came and went. Then 7:30. Elena called Marcus's phone, straight to voicemail. She tried Sophia's number and got the same result. By 8 o'clock, she was pacing the living room, alternating between worry and confusion. Had there been an accident? A change of plans she'd missed? By 9 o'clock, the worry had crystallized into something harder and colder. She called both phones again, leaving carefully neutral messages. Hi, just wanted to make sure everything's okay. I'm ready whenever you are. At 10 o'clock, Elena finally sat down and pulled out her phone, navigating to Sophia's Instagram with trembling fingers. The photos were already there, posted just 20 minutes earlier. Sophia glowing in a red dress at a table set with white linens and wine glasses. Marcus raising a toast. Lucy and James grinning beside their parents, all of them at Bella Vista Restaurant. The caption read, "Celebrating my promotion with the most important people in my life. Family means everything. #blessed, #family, #celebration." Elena stared at the screen until the images blurred. There was Marcus, still in his suit from work. There was Sophia in the dress Elena had helped her pick out last month. There were her grandchildren, dressed up and beautiful, enjoying their special evening. The whole family, just as Sophia had promised. Everyone except her. Her phone rang at 10:45. Marcus, his voice rushed and slightly slurred from wine. "Mom, I'm so sorry. There was a mix-up with the reservation timing, and Sophia thought you said—" "I understand," Elena said quietly, and she hung up. The silence that followed was unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of evening routines or the peaceful stillness of Sunday mornings. This silence had weight, pressing down on her chest like a living thing, filling every corner of the house with the echo of her own irrelevance. 2 weeks passed without a single phone call from either of her children. Elena told herself they were giving her space after the dinner incident, that they were probably too embarrassed to reach out. But deep down, she knew the truth. They were relieved. Relieved not to manage her feelings, relieved not to coordinate schedules around her availability, relieved not to pretend her presence mattered. She stopped cooking. The kitchen that had once been the heart of her home, where she'd prepared thousands of meals, packed countless lunchboxes, and created memories around holiday feasts, became a foreign landscape. The refrigerator hummed with forgotten leftovers from that last dinner she'd prepared for no one. Boxes of crackers and cans of soup became her sustenance, eaten standing at the counter while staring out at the bird feeder David had built 3 summers ago. Sleep became her enemy. Every night, she'd lie in the bed she'd shared with David for 28 years, staring at the ceiling and replaying every interaction from the past few months. Had she been too clingy? Too available? She dissected conversations like a detective examining evidence, searching for the moment when she'd become a burden instead of a blessing. The digital clock beside her bed would glow 2:47 a.m., then 3:23 a.m., then 4:15 a.m., as her mind churned through an endless loop of self-recrimination. David's chair in the living room became her refuge during the endless days. She'd sink into the worn leather that still held the faint scent of his cologne and surround herself with photo albums. Their wedding day, the children's first steps, birthday parties, graduations, family vacations. But now, these images felt like artifacts from someone else's life, evidence of a love and purpose that had somehow slipped through her fingers. The house itself seemed to echo her isolation. Every room held memories of a fuller life. The dining room where Sunday dinners had stretched into early evening, the living room where grandchildren had built blanket forts, the kitchen where laughter had mixed with the aroma of homemade meals. Now these spaces felt cavernous, filled with furniture that served no purpose, and silence that grew heavier with each passing hour. Elena stopped checking her appearance in mirrors. What was the point of fixing her hair when no one would see it? Of choosing clothes when no one would notice? Her reflection became a stranger, hollow-eyed and thin, wearing David's old sweaters because they were soft and smelled like better times. The mailbox filled with unopened bills and grocery store circulars. The landline rang occasionally, telemarketers mostly, their scripted enthusiasm a cruel mockery of the genuine voices she longed to hear. She stopped answering, stopped checking voicemail, stopped caring about the outside world that seemed to function perfectly well without her. "I raised them to be independent," she whispered to David's photograph one particularly dark afternoon, her voice hoarse from disuse. "But I never prepared myself to be abandoned. I gave them everything, my time, my energy, my entire identity. And when they were strong enough to fly, they didn't look back to see if I was still standing." The woman who had once been the cornerstone of her family had become invisible, and the most devastating part was discovering that no one seemed to miss her presence at all. It was on a gray Wednesday morning, 3 weeks into her isolation, that Elena finally forced herself to tackle David's study. She'd avoided the room since his death, unable to face the stacks of legal documents, financial papers, and half-finished crossword puzzles that still bore the imprint of his daily routine. But the house felt like it was suffocating her with memories, and she needed something, anything, to occupy her hands and mind. The study smelled like him: leather-bound books, the faint trace of his pipe tobacco, and the Old Spice aftershave he'd worn for 30 years. Elena moved slowly through the familiar chaos, sorting papers into piles. Keep, discard, deal with later. Tax returns from 5 years ago went into the discard pile, along with outdated insurance policies and warranties for appliances they'd long since replaced. She was reaching for a stack of manila folders when her fingers brushed against something wedged behind David's desk organizer. A cream-colored envelope, thick and formal, with her name written across the front in David's careful handwriting. "For Elena, open only if I'm gone." Her hands trembled as she turned it over, recognizing the weight of expensive paper and the careful way he'd sealed it with wax, as if the contents were too important to risk with ordinary tape. David had always been dramatic about the things that mattered most to him: their wedding vows written on handmade paper, birthday cards selected with the care of a curator, love letters that read like poetry even after decades of marriage. Inside the envelope were 3 items: a letter in David's handwriting, a business card for his attorney, and contact information for a financial advisor Elena had never heard of. Her heart pounded as she unfolded the letter, recognizing immediately the blue ink from the fountain pen she'd given him for their 20th anniversary. "My dearest Elena," it began, and she could almost hear his voice in the careful script. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you're probably cleaning out this disaster of a study like you always threatened to do. Stop crying, mi amor. I can see you from here, and you know I never could stand to see you sad." Through her tears, Elena smiled despite herself. Even in death, David knew her better than anyone alive. "I need to tell you something I should have said while I was there to hold your hand through it. Our children have become strangers to the woman who raised them. Over the past year, I've watched them treat you like hired help instead of their mother, taking your sacrifices for granted and dismissing your feelings like they don't matter. I wanted to say something, but you seemed determined to make excuses for them, and I didn't want to be the bearer of hard truths you weren't ready to hear. Elena's breath caught. David had noticed. All those times she'd made excuses for Marcus's impatience or Sophia's dismissiveness, he'd been watching, seeing what she'd been too hopeful to acknowledge. The house is yours completely, no joint ownership with the children. The life insurance goes entirely to you, not split 3 ways like they assume. I've made sure you're financially secure because I know you gave them everything, including the right to take you for granted. Call Thomas Morrison, the attorney whose card is enclosed. He'll explain everything. The letter continued. You spent 30 years teaching them to be independent, but somehow you forgot to teach them gratitude. More importantly, you forgot to teach yourself that your worth isn't measured by how much others need you. It's time you learned your own value, Elena. It's time you stopped waiting for permission to matter. Elena read David's letter 7 times that first day, each reading revealing new layers of truth she'd been too afraid to see while living it. She sat in his leather chair, the pages spread across her lap like a map to territory she'd never explored, the landscape of her own worth beyond motherhood and service to others. You forgot to teach yourself that your worth isn't measured by how much others need you. The words seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat, challenging everything Elena had believed about her purpose for the past 30 years. She'd built her entire identity around being indispensable, measuring her success by how quickly she could solve everyone else's problems and how seamlessly she could anticipate their needs. But David was right. She had taught her children to be independent while making herself completely dependent on their need for her. When had she stopped being Elena Martinez, the woman who'd commanded respect in her classroom, who'd negotiated her salary with confidence, who'd traveled to Spain before marriage and dreamed of writing children's books? When had she become simply mom, existing only in relation to others? The financial documents Thomas Morrison had sent over painted a picture Elena hadn't expected. David had been more financially savvy than she'd realized, investing carefully and building a portfolio that would sustain her comfortably for the rest of her life. The house was hers outright. No mortgage, no liens, no strings attached. She didn't need Marcus's legal expertise or Sophia's advice about investment accounts. She didn't need their permission, their approval, or their presence to live well. For the first time in 2 years, Elena looked at herself in the full-length mirror in her bedroom. Really looked, not just the cursory glance she'd been giving herself while hurrying to meet everyone else's needs. She saw a woman who'd let her silver hair grow dull and shapeless, who'd started buying clothes for comfort rather than confidence, who'd stopped seeing herself as anything more than a supporting character in other people's stories. I spent 2 years grieving David, she said to her reflection, and didn't realize I'd been grieving myself for much longer. That afternoon, Elena made her first independent decision in months. When Marcus's name appeared on her phone screen, the first time either child had called since the dinner incident, she stared at it for 3 rings before making a choice that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. She declined the call, not out of anger or spite, but out of something far more powerful: choice. For the first time in decades, Elena was choosing her own availability. She was deciding when and how to engage, rather than simply reacting to everyone else's schedules and needs. The phone rang again 15 minutes later. Sophia this time. Elena let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message with a strange sense of detachment. Hi, Mom. Just checking in. We've been thinking about you. Call me back when you get this. Thinking about her, as if she were a task on a to-do list, something to be checked off between more important obligations. The old Elena would have called back immediately, apologizing for missing their calls and reassuring them that everything was fine. But this Elena, the one David had been trying to awaken with his letter, had different priorities. She looked at the contact information for the pottery studio she'd driven past hundreds of times, the one with the cheerful sign advertising beginner classes. She'd always thought clay work looked peaceful, meditative. Now she wondered what it would feel like to create something beautiful with her own hands, something that existed purely because she'd willed it into being. Tomorrow, she decided, she would start learning who Elena Martinez was when she wasn't busy being everything to everyone else. The next morning, Elena woke at dawn for the first time in months without the crushing weight of purposelessness pressing against her chest. David's letter sat on her nightstand, its words having worked through her dreams like seeds finding fertile ground. She made coffee, real coffee, not the instant she'd been surviving on, and called Thomas Morrison before she could lose her nerve. The attorney's office was downtown, occupying the third floor of a building Elena had passed countless times while running errands for her children. Thomas Morrison was a soft-spoken man in his 60s, with kind eyes that reminded her of David's, and a way of explaining complex legal matters that made her feel intelligent rather than overwhelmed. "David spoke about you often," he said, spreading documents across his polished desk. "He was very specific about his wishes regarding the estate. Everything goes to you, the house, the investment accounts, the life insurance. He wanted to ensure you'd never have to depend on anyone else's goodwill." Elena signed papers with hands that grew steadier with each signature. For 30 years, David had handled their finances while she managed the household and children. Now she was discovering that she was not only capable of understanding these matters, but that she had more financial security than she'd ever imagined. The financial advisor, Maria Santos, met with Elena the following week. Maria was roughly Elena's age, with silver-streaked hair worn in a confident bob and the demeanor of someone who'd built her own success story. "Your husband was quite conservative with investments, which means you have a solid foundation. But Elena, you could afford to live any way you choose, travel, pursue hobbies, even relocate if you wanted a fresh start." The possibility of choice, real choice, felt foreign and exhilarating. Elena had spent so long reacting to other people's needs that the concept of proactive living seemed like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. That Thursday, she walked into Riverside Pottery Studio, a converted warehouse space filled with natural light and the earthy smell of clay. The instructor, Janet, not her former colleague, but a woman in her 40s with clay-stained aprons and an infectious laugh, welcomed Elena without the condescending enthusiasm she'd feared. "Have you worked with clay before?" Janet asked, leading Elena to a wheel surrounded by other beginners. "No," Elena replied, then added something that surprised her. "But I'm ready to learn." The clay felt alive beneath her hands, responsive and forgiving in ways that human relationships had ceased to be. As the wheel spun and her fingers learned to guide the rising form, Elena felt something inside her chest unknot for the first time in months. This was hers, the imperfect bowl taking shape, the quiet concentration, the simple satisfaction of creating something from nothing. When Marcus called that evening asking if she could babysit Lucy the following Saturday, Elena heard herself saying words that felt revolutionary. "I'm not available." "What do you mean, not available?" Marcus's voice carried the bewildered tone of someone whose assumptions had just been challenged. "I have pottery class." There was a pause so long Elena thought the call had dropped. "Pottery class?" "Yes, Saturday afternoons from 1 to 4. Elena didn't explain why this mattered to her or justify her choice. She didn't offer alternative times or ask about rescheduling her class to accommodate his needs. She simply stated a fact. She was not available. After hanging up, Elena sat in David's chair with a strange new feeling blooming in her chest. For the first time in years, she had said no without apologizing, without explanations, without guilt. She was learning to value her own time, and it felt like coming back to life. The shift was subtle at first, like water beginning to flow in a different direction. Elena's new boundaries created ripples that spread through her children's lives in ways they hadn't anticipated, disturbing the comfortable arrangements they'd taken for granted. Sophia called on a Tuesday evening, her voice tight with frustration. "Mom, I need you to watch James tomorrow night. My regular sitter canceled last minute, and I have the Henderson client dinner. You know, the one that could make or break the Davidson account." Elena was arranging flowers she'd bought for herself that afternoon, bright yellow chrysanthemums that caught the kitchen light beautifully. "I can't, sweetheart. I have book club tomorrow night." "Book club?" Sophia's voice pitched higher, the way it used to when she was a teenager told she couldn't borrow the car. "Since when do you have a book club?" "Since I joined one 3 weeks ago. We're discussing Educated by Tara Westover. It's fascinating, actually. You might enjoy it." "Mom, this is important. Can't you just skip one meeting? These people barely know you." Elena paused, recognizing the old familiar tug to abandon her own plans for someone else's emergency. But something had hardened in her chest, like clay fired in a kiln. "I made a commitment, Sophia, just like you made a commitment to your client dinner." The silence stretched between them, filled with Sophia's disbelief. Elena had never been unavailable before, never had priorities that competed with her children's needs. The very concept seemed to short-circuit Sophia's understanding of how their relationship worked. "I don't understand what's gotten into you lately," Sophia finally said, her voice carrying hurt and accusation in equal measure. "Ever since Dad died, you've been different." "I've been learning to live," Elena replied quietly, surprised by the truth of it. Marcus's reaction was more direct, delivered during an unscheduled visit the following Saturday. Elena was preparing for pottery class when he knocked, letting himself in with the key he'd never bothered to return. "Mom, we need to talk." His lawyer voice was in full effect, the tone he used with difficult clients. "Sophia told me about the babysitting thing, and Rebecca mentioned you turned down watching Lucy last weekend too." Elena continued packing her pottery tools, moving with a calm that seemed to agitate him further. "I had plans both times." "Plans." He said it like a foreign word. "Mom, they're counting on you. Lucy specifically asked for you, and I had to explain that Grandma was too busy with her hobbies." The word hobbies dripped with dismissal, as if Elena's newfound interests were childish whims rather than legitimate pursuits. She turned to face him fully, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years, not as her beloved son who needed protection and nurturing, but as a man who'd grown comfortable taking more than he gave. "Marcus, for 30 years I rearranged my life around your schedules. I canceled plans, postponed appointments, and made myself available whenever you needed me. When did you start assuming that would continue indefinitely?" His face flushed, the way it used to when she'd caught him in childhood lies. "That's different. You're our mother. Family comes first." "Family," Elena repeated, testing the word. "When was the last time you included me in family plans without me having to ask? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing, not because you needed something?" Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, his certainty cracking like ice in spring. The power dynamic they'd operated under for years was shifting, and he could feel the ground moving beneath his feet. Elena picked up her pottery bag and walked toward the door. "I need to go. I have a life to live." The confrontation came at Marcus's housewarming party in mid-February, a gathering Elena learned about purely by accident. She was sitting in Lucy's bedroom, reading Charlotte's Web aloud while Lucy drew pictures of the characters, when her granddaughter mentioned it with the casual innocence only children possess. "Daddy's so excited about the party Saturday," Lucy said, carefully coloring Wilbur's pink snout. "He says the new house is finally ready for company. Are you bringing your famous cookies, Grandma Elena?" Elena's hand stilled on the book pages. "What party, sweetheart?" "The housewarming party. Daddy bought a new house with a big backyard, and everyone's coming to see it. Aunt Sophia and James will be there, and Daddy's friends from work, and—" Lucy looked up, her 8-year-old face suddenly worried. "You're coming, right? I told Daddy I wanted you to sit next to me during dinner." Elena's heart ached at the transparency of her granddaughter's assumption, that of course Grandma would be included in important family events, that family meant everyone, not just the convenient people. Lucy had extended the invitation because in her child's logic, families belong together. "I'd love to come," Elena said carefully. "Did Daddy ask you to invite me?" Lucy's brow furrowed in concentration. I don't think so. I just asked if Grandma was coming, and he said— She paused, trying to remember exact words. He said we'd see. But I really want you there, Grandma. You can meet my new friend from school. Her mom might come too. Saturday evening found Elena standing on Marcus's front porch at 6:30, holding a casserole dish and wearing her best burgundy dress. She'd debated coming, wondering if she should call first, but Lucy's genuine desire for her presence had won over her uncertainty. Through the living room windows, she could see the party already in progress. Colleagues from Marcus's law firm, neighbors, Sophia laughing near the kitchen island with a wineglass in her hand. She rang the doorbell instead of using her key, a small gesture that felt like reclaiming her dignity. Marcus opened the door, his face cycling through surprise, confusion, and something that looked uncomfortably like guilt. Mom, we weren't— Lucy didn't mention— He glanced back at the party, then at Elena, clearly caught off guard. Lucy invited me, Elena said simply, stepping inside without waiting for permission. She was very excited about showing me your new home. The party noise dimmed slightly as people noticed her entrance. Elena recognized the looks: Marcus's colleagues who remembered her from previous firm events, neighbors she'd met in passing, all of them processing the appearance of the mother who apparently hadn't been expected. Sophia appeared at Marcus's shoulder, her smile bright but strained. Mom, what a surprise. You look lovely. Thank you. Elena set her casserole on the entry table and looked around the beautifully appointed living room. Hardwood floors, modern furniture, artwork that suggested taste and financial success. You've done a beautiful job with the house, Marcus. Your father would be proud. The mention of David created a ripple of uncomfortable silence. Lucy burst through the crowd of adults, launching herself at Elena with pure joy. Grandma, Elena, you came. Come see my new bedroom. Daddy painted it purple like I wanted. As Lucy tugged her toward the stairs, Elena heard Marcus's voice behind her, low and tense as he spoke to Sophia. I can't believe she just showed up like this. Elena stopped walking, Lucy's hand still in hers, and turned back to face her son. The party chatter continued around them, but something in Elena's expression made the immediate area grow quiet. Actually, Marcus, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room, I can't believe I had to show up uninvited to my own son's housewarming party. 3 months later, the phone call came on a Tuesday morning while Elena was tending her newly planted vegetable garden. She'd started growing her own herbs and tomatoes, another act of independence that felt like rebellion against the years of depending on others for everything, even groceries. Mrs. Martinez, this is Jennifer Walsh from First National Bank. I'm calling about your emergency contact information. We've had some confusion regarding account access requests. Elena straightened, brushing soil from her gardening gloves. What kind of confusion? Well, your son Marcus contacted us yesterday, requesting information about your accounts for estate planning purposes. But when we tried to reach your listed emergency contacts to verify the request, we discovered they're not your children. A Ms. Janet Reeves from Riverside Pottery Studio answered as your primary contact. Elena's heart skipped. She'd updated her emergency contacts the previous month after Janet had driven her to the hospital when she'd cut her hand badly on a broken pottery tool. It had felt natural to list the people who actually showed up when she needed help. Janet from pottery class, Maria Santos, her financial advisor, and Dr. Patricia Morales from her book club, who happened to be a retired nurse. That's correct, Elena said calmly. I updated my contacts recently. I see. Well, Mr. Martinez seemed quite surprised. He mentioned something about being removed as a beneficiary as well. I can't discuss specific account details over the phone, but he seemed to think there had been some mistake. After hanging up, Elena wasn't surprised when Marcus arrived at her door within the hour, Sophia close behind him. They entered with the purposeful stride of people accustomed to taking charge of situations. But something in Elena's posture, straight-backed and serene in her gardening clothes, gave them pause. Mom, what's this about the bank accounts? Marcus's lawyer voice was fully engaged, but there was something else underneath. uncertainty, maybe even fear. They said I'm not listed as an emergency contact anymore. That's correct. Elena gestured for them to sit, but remained standing herself. I updated my contacts to reflect the people who actually respond when I need help. Sophia's face crumpled with hurt and confusion. Mom, we're your children. Of course we'd help if you needed us. Elena walked to David's desk and retrieved the letter she'd kept there, its edges now soft from handling. Your father wrote this before he died. I think you should read it. She handed them the letter and watched their faces change as they read David's careful observations about their treatment of her. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Marcus's jaw tightened, but Elena could see the moment when his father's words hit home, when the lawyer in him recognized the accuracy of the indictment. Dad saw what I was too heartbroken to admit, Elena said quietly. You didn't lose your mother when he died. You just stopped pretending you needed one. Mom, that's not… Marcus began, but Elena held up her hand. I've also updated my will, she continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was saying. The house will be sold upon my death, with the proceeds going to establish a scholarship fund for single mothers returning to education. Your father's life insurance policy has been redirected to the same cause. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena could see them calculating, realizing that their assumptions about inheritance had been as unfounded as their assumptions about her availability. We can fix this, Sophia whispered, tears streaming down her face. We can do better. Elena looked at her daughter with the same love she'd always felt, but now tempered with something new, respect for her own worth. Yes, she said simply. You can. But not because you're afraid of losing an inheritance, because you want a relationship with your mother. The knock came on a rainy Thursday evening 2 weeks later, soft and hesitant, so different from the confident entrances her children used to make. Elena was in her living room, working on a pottery piece that refused to behave, when she heard the gentle tapping that seemed to ask permission rather than demand access. Sophia stood on the porch holding a bouquet of white roses, not the grocery store variety Elena might have expected, but the expensive kind from Martinez Florist downtown, the same shop where David used to buy flowers for their anniversaries. Her daughter's face was puffy from crying, her usually perfect makeup smeared, and she looked younger somehow, like the little girl who used to climb into Elena's lap after nightmares. Mom, Sophia's voice broke on the word. I've been reading Dad's letter every night for 2 weeks. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I see myself in every word he wrote, and I hate who I've become. Elena stepped aside to let her in, noting how Sophia waited for the invitation instead of walking past her like she used to. They sat in the living room where Elena had spent so many lonely evenings, but now the space felt different, charged with possibility and pain in equal measure. I thought about what you said about the inheritance, Sophia continued, twisting her wedding ring nervously. And I realized you were right. I was more upset about losing money than about losing you. And that makes me sick. What kind of person does that make me? Elena studied her daughter's face, seeing genuine anguish there alongside the tears. It makes you human, sweetheart. And it makes you your father's daughter. He always said the first step to fixing a problem was admitting you had one. They talked for 3 hours that night, Sophia asking questions she'd never thought to ask before. How had Elena felt when they stopped including her? What was it like to lose David and feel like she'd lost her children too? When had Sophia stopped seeing her mother as a person with feelings instead of just a resource to be managed? I keep thinking about that dinner, Sophia whispered as the evening grew late. You in your best dress waiting for us. The image haunts me, Mom. You must have felt so… abandoned. I did, Elena said simply, not softening the truth to spare Sophia's feelings. But I also learned something that night. I learned that I could survive being disappointed by the people I love most, and that was the beginning of learning I could live for myself. Marcus's attempt came 4 days later, different in approach but equally raw in its honesty. He brought Lucy with him, Not as emotional leverage, Elena realized, but as a bridge between the adults who'd forgotten how to talk to each other. "Grandma Elena," Lucy said, settling immediately into Elena's lap with the unconscious trust of childhood. "Daddy's been really sad lately. He keeps looking at old pictures and crying. Is he sick?" Elena met Marcus's eyes over Lucy's head, seeing her son struggle with vulnerability in a way that reminded her of his 5-year-old self trying to explain a broken lamp. "I fired Rebecca," Marcus said quietly, referring to his ex-wife. "Not from her job, from being my sounding board about family stuff. I realized I'd been using our conversations to justify treating you badly. She called me out on it, actually. Said Dad would be ashamed of me." Elena listened as Marcus stumbled through his apologies, his legal training failing him when it came to matters of the heart. But she heard something new in his voice, genuine remorse mixed with determination to rebuild what he'd damaged through neglect. "We want to try again, Mom," he said finally. "All of us. But we want to do it right this time." 6 months later, Elena sat in her backyard garden as the September sun filtered through the apple tree David had planted 15 years ago. Her hands, now permanently stained with clay and garden soil, moved gently over the pottery bowl she'd been glazing, a piece that would hold the tomatoes Lucy had helped her harvest that morning. The garden had become her sanctuary, a place where growth happened on her timeline and thrived under her careful attention. Rows of vegetables she'd planted herself stretched toward the fence, heavy with late-season abundance that would feed her through the winter. The herbs she'd started from seed, basil, rosemary, thyme, released their fragrances when she brushed against them, scents that spoke of independence and self-sufficiency. Lucy's voice drifted from the kitchen window where she was helping Sophia prepare dinner. Not because Elena needed the help, but because they'd asked if they could contribute. The weekly dinners had resumed, but everything was different now. They came to her, scheduled around her pottery classes and book club meetings. They asked about her life instead of simply updating her on theirs. They listened when she spoke. "Abuela, the sauce is bubbling," Lucy called out, and Elena smiled at the Spanish word that had replaced the more generic grandma. It had been Sophia's idea, a way of honoring Elena's heritage that they'd somehow overlooked for years. Marcus appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel, another sight that would have been impossible 6 months ago. "Mom, do you want us to set the table out here? It's such a beautiful evening." Elena nodded, watching as her son carefully arranged place settings on the outdoor table she'd bought for herself after realizing she could eat wherever she chose. The table had been an act of rebellion against years of eating lonely meals at the kitchen counter, and now it served as the centerpiece for family gatherings that honored everyone's presence equally. James ran into the backyard carrying the bread basket, his gap-toothed grin unchanged by the family's transformation. At 7 now, he was old enough to understand that something had shifted in their family dynamic, though too young to articulate it. What he knew was that Grandma Elena smiled more now, that she had friends who called and visited, and that she didn't wait by the phone anymore. As they gathered around the table, Elena looked at each face illuminated by the string lights she'd hung herself, another small act of creating beauty in her own space. Sophia was asking about her pottery class, genuinely interested in the techniques Elena was learning. Marcus was discussing a legal case, but he paused when Elena spoke, actually listening to her perspective instead of waiting for his turn to talk. "I learned something important these past months," Elena said, as they passed dishes, family style, everyone contributing to the ritual of sharing a meal. "I spent 30 years teaching you to be independent, but I forgot to teach myself the most important lesson of all." Lucy looked up from her plate, sauce on her chin. "What lesson, Abuela?" Elena reached over to wipe her granddaughter's face, a gesture of love that felt freely given rather than obligatory. "I learned that the people who truly love you don't make you beg for their attention. I raised my children to be strong and independent, but somewhere along the way, I forgot to teach them gratitude, and I forgot to teach myself that my worth isn't measured by how much others need me." She looked around the table at her family, flawed, learning, trying. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is showing them how to lose you. because only then do they learn your true value. The evening stretched ahead of them, unhurried and full of possibility.